The cost of living crisis is making it hard for millions to afford basic things. In the UK, poverty was already a big problem due to over 10 years of budget cuts. Now, many families are struggling even more. People with low incomes are getting hit the hardest. Many are finding it tougher to make ends meet and are sinking further into poverty. It's been 20 years and 6 prime ministers since the UK last saw a real drop in poverty. Yes, really. This winter, millions of Brits won't be able to pay their energy bills and will be left without heat. A lot of people can't afford basic things to live and are depending on charities and food banks just to get by. There are currently 8 million working age adults and over 2 million pensioners in poverty. Over the last 10 years, the number of children in poverty has increased by nearly 600,000, and the number of poor pensioners has gone up by over 500,000. Poverty rates in the UK have stayed really stubborn for the last 30 years, showing that there's a deep-rooted problem. High poverty rates also affect working people. Over half of those in poverty come from families where at least one adult works. More than 2/3 of children in poverty live in working family homes. In the years 2021 to 2022, about 6 million people in the UK were in very deep poverty. This means their income was far below the standard poverty line. What's even more alarming is that over 12 million people had experienced very deep poverty at least once between 2017 and 2021. The number of people facing the most extreme form of poverty, known as destitution, has more than doubled in the last 5 years. In 2017, there were over 1.5 million people experiencing destitution, and this number has significantly increased since then. Even more worryingly, the number of children experiencing destitution has almost tripled. These statistics highlight a growing and severe issue of poverty in the UK that desperately needs addressing. The cost of living crisis is making poverty worse, meaning there are probably more people struggling now than ever before. Between April 2022 and March 2023, the Trussell Trust saw a record number of people asking for help. Over 760,000 people had to use the charity's food banks for the first time. That's like everyone in Nottingham needing food assistance. These numbers are just a small part of the problem. Many more people are skipping meals and going hungry, but not asking for help from food banks. In June 2023, 9 million adults had trouble getting enough food, according to the Food Foundation. About 3 million adults even had to go without eating for an entire day because they couldn't afford food. Even when benefits went up in April, the poorest people still had less money to spend. Inflation made sure that that extra money was pretty much made meaningless. Big life changes like getting sick or losing a job can make people poor, but mostly it's because of big ongoing problems. High costs keep people stuck in a really tight spot. This could include not having a job or having a low-paying job. If people didn't get good training or education, it's hard for them to get a stable job and break out of poverty. The UK's welfare system makes it hard for people to get enough money to live on. Social security isn't enough for workers, job seekers, or those with health issues to avoid poverty. Benefits can be tough to get, and sometimes getting a job can actually lower their income. It's especially hard for people with mental health issues like addiction to get out of poverty. Also, those who have been in prison often struggle to find jobs to support themselves when they get out. The cost of living crisis is making more people in the UK poor. Hundreds of thousands are being affected. Make no mistake about it, poverty in the UK is getting worse. It's rising fast and people are falling further into poverty. The Office for Budget Responsibility said living standards will drop by 3.5% by 24-25 compared to before the pandemic. While this drop is now expected to be less steep than earlier thought, it's still the biggest fall in real living standards since records began in the 1950s. During the pandemic, the government added £20 to universal credit, which helped some families escape poverty. But in October 2021, that extra help was taken away, just as costs started to rise. In April 2023, benefits increased to match inflation, but it's still not enough to cover basic living costs. According to a study by the Trussell Trust, people on universal credit are still £140 short each month for essentials like food, heating and rent, even after the benefit increases. The Institute for Fiscal Studies found that benefit claimants are now 6% worse off in real terms compared to 2019. This means they're struggling more to make ends meet. Poverty hurts people's mental and physical health, making the NHS's job even harder. The NHS Confederation has warned that the cost of living crisis could have severe, long-lasting effects on health. Poverty is connected to problems like malnutrition, obesity, eating disorders and depression. These issues lead to more people needing the NHS services to treat both short-term and long-term health problems caused by poor diets. By 2050, NHS spending on obesity alone could go up to £9.7 billion per year, and malnutrition is already costing the NHS about £19.6 billion per year. Poverty causes a lot of stress because people worry about paying for their daily needs. It makes them feel hopeless, lowers their self-esteem, and makes it harder to access healthcare. This stress, along with not being able to afford healthy food, leads to more health problems for people living in poverty. They also have a harder time getting treatment. Higher fuel bills during the energy crisis made things even worse. People in poverty often don't have strong social support because they're focused on just getting by with very little. This puts them at a higher risk of becoming homeless or facing addiction issues. Children living in poverty are at a higher risk of being exploited by or becoming victims of criminal gangs, warned the Children's Commissioner. She pointed out that local authorities are failing to protect these disadvantaged children. Life expectancy in the poorest areas of England is the lowest it's been since 2011. From 2018 to 2020, women in these areas are expected to live 9 months less and men 4 months less compared to 2011 to 2013. During the COVID pandemic, death rates in the poorest areas of England and Scotland were more than double those in the richest areas. Households are considered below the poverty line if they earn less than 60% of the average income. The exact figure changes depending on the number of people in the household, since their needs vary. The minimum income standard shows how much money difference households need for a basic but acceptable living standard. As an example, a family with 2 parents and 2 school-aged children need to earn £42,418 together. This amount, after taxes and any benefits, should cover what they need for a basic but decent living standard. Now, the United Nations has a different way to define poverty. They talk about absolute poverty, which means not having even enough money for basic needs like food, clothing and housing. This way of measuring poverty helps to compare living conditions in different countries, because what people need to live decently can vary depending on where they live. The Social Metrics Commission looks at poverty by considering extra costs like childcare and the expenses of living with a disability. They also check if people have savings or investments that could help them financially. Families with children have a high poverty rate because of extra costs and the need for childcare. Larger families with 3 or more kids face even higher poverty rates. In 21-22, 43% of kids in big families were living in poverty. This problem is worse due to government policies like the 2-child limit and needing to split costs of living payments among more people. The number of single parents facing extreme financial hardship, known as destitution, nearly tripled from 2019 to 2022. 11% of UK households experiencing destitution were single parent households. Nearly 44% of children living with single parents were in poverty. In comparison, only 25% of children with both parents were in poverty. Having a disability also greatly increases the risk of falling into poverty. This is because of extra living and care costs and difficulties in finding suitable jobs. The charity Scope found that disabled households face extra costs of about £975 each month. This means that disabled families need nearly £12,000 more per year to have the same living standards as non-disabled families. Poverty also heavily affects migrants. The government's no recourse to public funds policy stops people from accessing social benefits based on their immigration status. This leads to higher poverty rates and a greater risk of homelessness for these individuals. 12% of households facing severe poverty in 2022 were led by Black, British, Caribbean or African individuals, even though they only make up 4% of the population. Gender plays a role in poverty too. 3 million women have low-paying jobs compared to 1.9 million men. Families with one full-time and one part-time worker are now twice as likely to fall into poverty compared to 20 years ago, according to the Institute for Public Policy Research. The latest government data shows that the West Midlands has the highest poverty rate in the UK at 27%. This is followed by the North East and London, which both have 25%. Yorkshire and the Humber, the East Midlands and the North West all have poverty rates of 23%. Poverty rates are quite similar in England and Wales, both at 22%, and Scotland at 21%. Northern Ireland has the lowest rate of 16%. Child poverty is much lower in Scotland at 24% compared to 31% in England and 28% in Wales, partly due to the Scottish child payment. The lowest poverty rates in the UK are in the east of England at 18% and the southeast and southwest of England both at 19%. Poverty can lead to a difficult cycle of debt. People with low incomes often have to take out loans and use credit cards to make ends meet. Over time, the interest adds up and they owe more than they can afford to pay back. Debt in the UK tends to hit poorer people harder than it does the wealthy. Even before the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, household debt was rising. In 2018, 7 million people were trapped in serious debt, giving more than a quarter of their income just to pay it off, according to the Centre of Responsible Credit. The poorest households in the UK make up nearly half of those struggling with debt. They end up paying 3 times more than high-income households do when it comes to debt. This is mainly due to low wages, cuts in welfare benefits, and insecure jobs. Many debt campaigners say that lenders are taking advantage of poor people's desperation by charging them very high interest rates. In the coming years, debt levels in the UK are expected to reach record highs. By 2026, the average household is expected to owe nearly £17,200, according to the TUC. Debts has serious consequences. Recent research made by the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute found that about half of the people in debt have had suicidal thoughts in the last 20 months. Fixing the welfare system is crucial to reducing poverty in the UK. Right now, benefits aren't enough to cover basic living costs. Charities and organisations want political leaders to ensure people can afford the essentials. The government could help, but they're choosing not to. It's really important to stop people from being so poor because it's the right thing to do. We need our leaders to step up and fix this. That's why we need all of the political parties to come together with clear plans to solve this problem now. Making sure people can afford basic living costs shouldn't even be a question. We need a welfare system that actually works and helps people live well, whether they're working or not. Waiting 5 weeks for their first universal credit payment makes things worse, putting people in more debt and making them rely more on food banks and have trouble paying their rent. Nearly 2/3 of people really struggling to get by have a disability or long-term health problem, making everyday activities hard. This number was 54% in 2019. Disabilities and health problems often mean extra costs, like medication and making places accessible. Plus, it's harder for people with disabilities to find work. More than half, 56% of adults who aren't working live in poverty. People working part-time are twice as likely to be poor compared to those working full-time. Caregivers, people who actually look after someone without even being paid, are also more likely to live in poverty compared to those who don't have caregiving duties. Experts say we should remove the 2-child limit. This rule stops families from getting extra benefits if they have more than 2 children. They also think we should get rid of the benefit cap, which limits the total benefit a family can get, no matter how much they need. To really solve poverty, we need to raise wages, improve support for low-income people, and fix problems in the rental market. Experts agree that the cost of living crisis won't truly end until wages go up to match rising prices. Dealing with poverty isn't just about fixing problems now, it's about building a future where everyone can succeed. Poverty isn't something we have to accept. We have the resources to solve it, but it takes effort and commitment. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching.